Hello, and thank you for listening to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. Please subscribe and follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, and take the time to leave a review. Our Instagram channel is instagram.com Liberty Gun Rights. Video episodes are uploaded to rumble.com and my YouTube channel, and my YouTube channel and Rumble is called James Moffitt. You can just search for it. Please subscribe and follow these channels for future updates. I release episodes every Friday at 8 a.m. Thank you for listening, and now to our featured episode. Hello and welcome to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. My name is James Moffitt, and I'll be your host. Today we have a gentleman by the name of Sam Peterson. I can't speak all of a sudden. Sam Peterson, how are you?
I'm doing well, James. How are you?
Good. So do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listening audience.
Yeah, so my name's Sam Peterson. I'm a former Army bomb technician with a couple of different combat deployments under my belt. Once I got back from Afghanistan, really struggled with PTSD, TBI, and depression. Little known fact that EOD has one of the highest suicide rates of any job within the Department of Defense. And I got into mental health and treating depression, anxiety, PTSD, and TBI more effectively because of my brothers and sisters beside me who were dropping like flies due to suicide. So I've dedicated my professional career to creating programs that get to the root cause of these issues and help heal and rewire the brain simultaneously.
Well, thanks for your service. I appreciate that. And so I'm going to read this off your Podmatch profile. We just kind of launch off of that. It says, Sam Peterson offers a compelling perspective on mental health treatment for veterans and first responders. This conversation could focus on innovative healing methods for trauma, discussing Sam's journey from military service to developing transformative mental health therapies can provide valuable insights into blending science with mission-driven entrepreneurship. That's a big word. So I have several veterans, I would imagine, that listen to this podcast. And so when I saw your profile, I thought he's a veteran and it looks like he has an interesting story. So as an EOD person in the military, how many oh shit moments did you have?
There were a number. One of the biggest ones that I ever had with my team was during my first deployment. If you want to hear the whole story, it's pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we were in southern Afghanistan, and there was a big checkpoint, a big long checkpoint that was it had jersey barriers on either side and gravel all the way down. It's about 200 meters long, so okay. 2 football fields long, rather skinny, gravel about the size of my fist, and a guard tower. So the Afghan police at one point got stoned and decided to leave their post to go get some food out in town. The Taliban came in and laced the area with improvised explosive devices. Pressure plates were what they used this time. And so put out a bunch of IEDs all over the place, and then lit the guard tower on fire and left. Obviously,
oh my God.
Caused a bit of a scene. All of a sudden, this checkpoint's on fire. The U.S. rolls in. I believe it was a bunch of MPs rolled in, and they drive into this checkpoint and almost immediately get hit with an IED. These were pretty small anti-personnel IEDs, so it was a landmine wrapped in detonating cord that went off to a jug of about 10 pounds of explosive, enough to kill the hell out of you. So they roll through, boom, first device goes off. So they roll all the way through the checkpoint. Nobody else gets hit. They decide to dismount for some reason, so they get out of their gun trucks, and a lieutenant he gets out of his truck and walks all the way back down the kill zone. And at the end of it, right before he's about to get to safety, he steps on one of these things. And this story has a happy ending, and you know what they say, God loves idiots and small children. This device
my God.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was a little Afghani landmine that was wrapped in detonating cord, and this guy is so absolutely fucking lucky because this mine didn't detonate. If it had detonated, it would have set off the detonating cord, which set off the charge, which would have peppered him with these fist-sized rocks. He would have had a lot of holes. So instead of detonating, it deflagrated. So basically, this guy steps on this thing and just fire shoots out everywhere, and he takes the old number 2 in his pants, and it doesn't set off the charge. He gets to walk away, doesn't even break his leg. So we get called out, our EOD team, and
right.
Yeah, we get called out to the scene. This guy's in shock, just sitting there.
Oh, I bet.
I just walked
What
up
was
to
I
him. I was
thinking?
like, oh no, I just walked up to him. I was like, hey man, just real quick, I'm part of the EOD team. Can you just give me 9 numbers off the top of your head? Just go for it. I want to see if we can hit the lottery twice. He didn't think that was very funny, but we ended up in this situation. We ran the incident, and all of just everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Murphy was with us that day, Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
And basically none of our equipment was working. The robot went down. There was no way to use our ground penetrating radar because of these rocks.
Right.
So we're like, hey, we know what size these devices are, and these guys aren't going to get support. They're going to have to hold down this situation unless we can do something. So we got into our up armored truck, and we just drove back and forth and back and forth until we set off all the devices on ourselves.
Really?
Yeah, and every time one of those would go off, you get the little pucker moment.
Well, I bet. So the vehicle that you were in was hefty enough it could withstand it?
Yeah. It's a Jerv. It's a mine-resistant 6-axled giant truck with a V-hole and tractor tires. So
I got you. Okay.
Yeah, it's a big old monster, but that was one of many instances that had that close call, because you never know what you might hit. You might have one that's like an anti-personnel, it's not going to hurt your truck, and then one that's much bigger that was meant to kill you.
Well, I guess that lieutenant is going to think twice, right? Or he probably thought twice before he got out of his vehicle anymore, right?
I hope he works for the lottery or something somewhere. I'll meet him someday.
Yeah, I wonder what was going through his mind when he stepped on that thing and was like, "Oh my god!"
You know what? He probably has PTSD from that moment, and he needs to come into the clinic to get some treatment.
I can only imagine. I don't think I've never been in action. I've never been in the military. So my father was in Vietnam and Korea both, and he never talked about it. So I can only imagine what he saw. But anyway, it's hard to really understand what you guys go through.
Yeah, it's a calling for a lot of us, especially like in the EOD community. It takes a special kind of person to walk down range on an explosive device and go render it safe. So there's a special mindset that I think is shared with a lot of the special operations community as well. Just that, just because you're doing kind of a crazy thing, and also because there is a very long pipeline that's meant to weed people out. So you end up in these really special positions with really special people, and it was one of the best times I've ever had in my life. I still miss doing like large demo shots, like thousands of pounds, and feeling the old blast wave go through your body when you're at a safe distance.
Right.
That's key.
Yes.
Is a big deal, because as soon as you're not at a safe distance, things go wrong in the brain pretty quickly.
Right. I can imagine. So go ahead and talk more about just whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, so, kind of on that topic of brain injuries, this is one of the biggest things that people don't understand. We get told by the medical establishment that if you get a brain injury, you're kind of screwed. You're going to have that initial reduction in your ability to operate, and the most that the medical establishment can do at this point is try to rehabilitate you, teach you to walk again, teach you to talk again. But at the end of the day, none of these traditional approaches actually affect the underlying neurobiology of a traumatic brain injury. And that is the inflammatory cascade that happens to people when they have gone through this injury. So there's 2 phases of TBI. There's that initial injury, and then there's what's called the secondary biochemical injury. Basically what happens is as soon as blood flow gets shunted off to the brain, your cells have to switch over from making ATP the normal way. It's called cellular respiration. They have to switch over to what's called anaerobic glycolysis. That's how cancer cells make energy. So now all of a sudden we're in an energy-starved environment, and there's no way to get the tissue the energy it needs to clean up the detritus, because we've had that initial injury. This causes this long-term effect in the brain that slowly retracts your neurons and puts you on the path to dementia. And unless we interdict that whole process, that's your fate. Luckily, we have treatments that can do this.
Well, that's awesome. So how did your own PTSD experience motivate you to innovate mental health therapies?
Yeah, it became something that was beating my ass every single day. I developed a panic disorder, so it wouldn't matter what was going on. I would be walking through Walmart I remember this one specific instance. I bought a TV. I just built a house coming back from Afghanistan the second time, was walking through Walmart with this new TV, and some random person just walked by and gave me this stank eye for no reason. Never saw this individual ever before in my life. And it just sent me into a tailspin. And I had to put that thing in my car, drive back home, take a different route home so in case someone was following me. And then I pulled into the garage, closed it, and walked into the house, closed all the windows, and sat in a dark room for about 3 hours with my gun in my hand, just freaking out. And that I went on for several months until finally, like, I was just ready to kill myself, and I almost did. And it was only because of the intervention of a couple of my friends that I'm even here today. And in my former career field in EOD, that is not a rare story. This happens all the time to these guys, especially when you get to a certain stress level and you get out after that. So you build up all of this stress over time, you build up all of these injuries in the brain, and then you get out of the military and now you're just stuck with it. You're just sitting in the muck and the mire. And that's where I started. You know, it was actually MDMA is what saved my life. A friend of mine introduced me to that experience, and it was absolutely transformative. And so it got me on this track. It kind of reset my brain, and it got me into thinking, hey, maybe there's something we can do to fix these things. If I can get this temporary window into happiness, maybe there's something we can do to make that permanent. And, you know, I got on the upswing, and about 5 months after that incident, you know, one of my mentors walked out into his backyard and shot himself in the head with his 3-year-old son in the house. And I was the last guy to talk to him at the unit. And I know that Neil would be alive today if he had been able to experience the same thing that I had.
So tell us what MDMA is.
Yeah, so MDMA is it was commonly used as a club drug. It used to know the entire chemical name. It is a drug that's serotonergic in nature, so it affects your serotonin levels. So basically what it does, MDMA takes all of your bioavailable serotonin that's being stored in your brain, and it tells it to dump into the synapses. And when those little serotonin molecules bond to those synapses, they send a lot of little happy feelings down your spine. And that feeling really opens up a person. It feels like pure joy.
Is that sort of like dopamine?
Dopamine is a reward chemical.
Right.
Serotonin, think of, actually, the best way to describe this is dopamine is like your instant reward, like it's released when you're having sex, versus serotonin is more like a well-being chemical, like sitting on a beach in a hammock feeling good and just feeling really well regulated. That's serotonin versus dopamine. So this feeling of well-being that's creates a lot of therapeutic value. I mean, the MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, was just in phase 3 trials for MDMA for PTSD, and the results were amazing. Like, we're talking about symptom remission I want to say it was either 62 or 68%. Don't quote me on that exact number, but a disproportionately large number of study participants no longer qualified for the diagnosis after receiving treatment. And that's insane. To give you a reference point, like, if we're like talking about depression treatment, on their very best day, an antidepressant has a 33% chance of doing anything but giving you a side effect. That's from the largest study in antidepressants ever done.
Wow.
So yeah, when we're talking about like clinical efficacy, it's pretty insane.
So let's talk about PTSD a little bit. Give us a little bit of context. I mean, do people get in the military? Do people get PTSD because of extreme combat situations, or is it just the overall effect of what you're experiencing when you're like in Afghanistan or Iraq or a war zone somewhere?
It really, honestly, depends by the person and the experience. There are several different, I would call them subtypes. Okay. So with my experience in special operations, it was more specific trauma. So, on a special operations team, you kind of are the hunter. You're not usually just going out on patrol and getting hit. So the trauma happens, something goes wrong on a mission, you're in a firefight and one of your buddies, gets killed. That would be one instance of something that would cause potentially PTSD, versus a lot of the people we work with at the clinic were infantry or military police. And that's it's really like a different subset, if you will, that's caused by being hyper aroused all the time. So being in that hyper focused state where you're just waiting for something to kick off, that causes a different kind of entrainment in the amygdala. So, and to take a step back here and just talk about PTSD as a whole. And I really think it's important to say post-traumatic stress disorder. I do not like the whole PTS thing. It is not true. There is a disorder in the brain. And that disorder is this. If you were to just take a cross section of the brain and you were to look at how it was firing in the brain of someone with PTSD, you would see an underactive prefrontal cortex, so an underactive executive functioning center, and an overactive amygdala. So your fight, flight, or freeze is getting more blood flow and more energy, and it's hijacking your lived experience. That's a disorder. And the way that we can correct that is by reinforcing the prefrontal cortex, giving you more executive control over your brain and your body state. So, in the treatment of PTSD, we really want to focus on a couple of things. One is down-regulating inflammation, because PTSD is highly inflammatory to the brain. And the other is reinforcing that prefrontal cortex, so giving you a dimmer switch against your symptoms so that your limbic brain, that amygdala, is not hijacking your lived experience all the time.
That sounds very complicated.
The brain is the most complex organ that we know of in the universe.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, the clowns that are playing around with AI right now they're trying to duplicate the human brain. I don't think that's ever going to happen.
I think you absolutely could. You could simulate human consciousness. It really just comes down to the amount of data you'd be able to crunch, because there's trillions of cells in the system, all interacting in very unique ways using different messaging molecules. So yeah, I can't remember. It was something I heard someone talking about this, saying it would take something like 500 gigabits, or 500 terabytes to just map the electrical wiring of the human brain.
Right.
And that's just one aspect.
Right. I think they have massive computers doing the number crunching at the moment. I don't think I think we're a long way away before they actually can stick that in a robotic head somewhere. I don't think that's, I may be wrong.
I mean,
they've come a long way for sure. There's a lot of advances.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we'll really hit the next wave of mapping the brain once Neuralink really comes online and gets more mass adoption, because then you have electrodes inside the brain able to take in data, and that's the level of fidelity that isn't quite mass market yet. You can only do so much with an MRI. Outside looking in, you can look at clusters of neurons and see how resources are moving. But until we get to the point where we can put a flashlight in there and map the whole thing, I think you're right. It's going to be a minute.
So what have you observed as the most promising development in overcoming PTSD?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. What our kind of claim to fame here at MindSpa is using multiple treatment modalities simultaneously. And when we use things like ketamine infusion therapy along with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, we're taking that inflammatory process that I talked about earlier, we're taking that down immediately. So someone can feel better very, very quickly, within a week. And once you downregulate that inflammation, we can increase the density of neurons in their prefrontal cortex, so give them back that executive functioning control with something like transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is a fairly old technology that's really starting to hit the mainstream now. And that's using MRI technology to stimulate neurons so we can increase their density in certain areas.
So you said MindSpa. Is that your organization, your company?
Yeah, MindSpa's the clinic that I founded alongside Dr. Ron Schwenkler, and we're here in the Denver area. So we have a 3,500 square foot facility. We treat a lot of veterans and first responders here in Denver.
That's wonderful. So how do ketamine, TMS, and HBOT work together to heal the brain?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing that we're trying to do when we're healing the brain from PTSD, depression, anxiety, or TBI is we have to downregulate inflammation. We have to take that inflammatory process down. That's the first thing we need to do. And all of a sudden, once you do that, symptoms typically decrease rather rapidly. So once we have all of that inflammatory stuff taken care of, we can start to give the brain more resources, because healing and rewiring the brain is a very, very energy intensive process. So we give the brain more energy with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which, I can go into in a minute, but we're giving the brain more energy with that. We're, again, keeping that inflammation down, and then we can use something like transcranial magnetic stimulation or even culturally competent talk therapy to help rewire the brain, to help change behaviors, change outlooks, change thought patterns for the better. And when you do all these things, when you put them together simultaneously, what we've observed is that if someone goes through this whole treatment protocol from soup to nuts, the average time that they reach symptom remission is 14 to 17 days.
Okay. That's pretty good then, huh?
It's definitely better than anything you can put in a pill bottle.
Well, I bet. So when people come to you or come to your organization, MindSpa, how long do you think the average person has been dealing with PTSD?
Oh man, The average person who's coming to us for trauma has been dealing with whether, PTSD of some sort or depression or anxiety related to trauma for 5 to 10 years. People tend to, especially in the populations that we serve, veterans and first responders tend to stuff things down until it just gets to a boiling point. And then they finally go, yep, I need help. Or what happens more often than not is their wives or significant others go, hey, get your ass into the clinic. I can't deal with you anymore.
Right. Well, and I would imagine that maybe not so much today, but probably in the past there was some sort of a stigma attached to asking for help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always been a stigma in mental health, and it's starting to lift. And kind of my thesis on why there's a stigma in mental health is we haven't had good solutions for any of this shit. We've been told by the establishment that it's talk therapy and meds, and that's your options. And that creates a stigma because you know that you're not going to get better. Medications don't have a remission rate. You're treating a symptom. So it's pretty easy to draw the corollary here that if I get diagnosed with something like this, it's a black mark on my forehead that I can't take off. And that's where the stigma comes in. I think the biggest thing that we can do to attack the stigma in mental health is get the word out that there are more effective therapies out there. Because if people understood that you're not stuck with this diagnosis, this is a temporary state that you're in because of the trauma that you've experienced, once they realize that they don't have to feel that way all the time and that there's something that they can do about it that can actually remit their symptoms so they're not feeling them all the time, well, holy shit, now I can scrub that letter off my forehead and move on with my life.
Right. And that's quality of life is key, right? We want people to feel better and be able to function and move on.
That's post-traumatic growth.
Could you share a success story from your programs that disrupted traditional mental health approaches?
Yeah, I've got so many. One of the ones that always comes to mind for me is a really good friend of mine. His name's Rich, and I have his permission to share this story. But have you ever met someone that's like fallen off the trauma tree and hit every single branch on their way down with their face?
Not really.
Well,
I guess I'm lucky that way.
Must live in a nice neighborhood then. So this guy grew up dirt poor. Dad was a semi-professional boxer, so super bad TBI. He was abusive, and his mom was a hooker who was addicted to drugs. So him and his twin brother got moved around, almost starved to death, moved around from foster care through their young, and just trauma after trauma, physical abuse after physical abuse. He finally, grows up. He's 18 years old, joins the Marine Corps to get the hell out of his current situation, becomes estranged from his twin brother, which was traumatic in and of itself. So he joins the Marine Corps and finds his people. Goes through force recon, gets selected, and really finds his family for the first time. And then he gets deployed to Iraq. And in the Battle of Fallujah, they're kicking in doors and clearing all the Al-Qaeda insurgents out of that area. And his best friend, Mike, who's also a squad leader, was the first in the stack. And they've been clearing buildings all day. They line up on this larger building, kicks in the door, and there are 17 Al-Qaeda insurgents staring at the door with guns ready to go, machine guns pointed at the door. And his best friend saw what was going on and engaged all the targets in there, and then sprinted off to the side to draw everyone's fire, which saved the rest of the stack's life. So he got to watch his best friend get gunned down by 17 Taliban insurgents. He took a bullet and a grenade during that engagement as well. And so when I met him, this guy's entire life was trauma. And
wow.
Like from start to finish, every time something good had happened to him, something really bad happened right after that. And he was, in a state where he was abusing alcohol, abusing some drugs, and wasn't sleeping, had no job outlook. He was living off of his disability, and we were able to put him through one of the inpatient programs that I helped start, and do this whole protocol, the combination of TMS, ketamine, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and it healed the guy. You could see within a week, his scores for depression and anxiety nosedived, and he started to get that mental clarity back and built that up over time. And now he's got a kick-ass job. He got a new wife, and he lives on a horse ranch.
Oh, that's awesome.
Up in the mountains. So that's
probably saved his life.
It was funny that years later, he said, because he when I initially met him, he was coming into town to meet our friend, to hang out with our friend John, who was in the Marine Corps with him. And he's like, yeah, I came to visit John, but I was there to see you. I just didn't know it yet.
Well, I'm glad that there is hope, right? There's hope for people to get the help that they desperately need.
Oh yeah, people need to understand that if you have a traumatic brain injury, PTSD, depression, anxiety, you don't have to feel this way all the time. There are treatments that are specifically designed to help your brain heal. The access to these treatments is something that we're working at every day, and we've got a pretty damn good hold on how we can bridge the gap for a lot of people.
Right. Let's see if I can find you on the web here. You said it's called Mind Spa?
Yeah, mindspadenver.com.
Denver altogether?
Yep, altogether.
There it is. All right, let me share the screen. I'm getting better at sharing stuff. I always like to do that when I can. There we go. So this is a resource that people can go to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a big blog section that talks about, all the different treatments we use and how they work in the brain. So yeah, you can see there's quite a bit there. And so, if you're looking for more resources, I'm also building out some resource guides for each one of our treatments, and I'll be posting those in our blog section and on the website here in the next couple of weeks.
Here's a podcast. Or is that a podcast episode?
Oh yeah, that's a podcast. I do lots of podcasts.
That guy looks familiar. Very good.
Well, yeah, James, I mean, from where you're at, what have you seen as the mental health needs of the veteran and first responder communities?
Well, I mean, there's, if you're a police officer, EMT, firefighter, law enforcement, military, if you've been engaged in combat or been overseas and experienced, traumatic events, then there's no doubt that they need help. It's like one of the key things you said earlier is that, first of all, men don't like to go to the doctor, right? We like to handle shit ourselves, right? Like to shove it down, whatever happens, whatever the physical or mental ailment is. I'm a baby boomer, and when I was raised in the 70s and 80s, you were taught to men don't cry. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Blah blah blah. You're the tough guy. You make it happen, right? And I think that from a standpoint of therapy and self-care and all of this all wrapped up together, I think there has been a transformation and an elimination of a lot of stigma. I have heard, I've not been in the military, but I've heard it said that he was in the military, so we're just going to label him with PTSD. He probably doesn't have that, but he's just using that as an excuse or a crutch, right? And there's probably a lot of ignorance talking there when people say that. And I wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have, if somebody told me they had PTSD, I wouldn't know. I'm not a medical professional, so I wouldn't have a clue whether they're using that for a crutch or not, I don't know if you've heard that before or not, but...
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a number of stigmas that do come along with being a veteran, and PTSD is one of them. The layperson doesn't really understand, first of all, what that means and how it shows up, and also that it again is not a life sentence, that things like PTSD absolutely can be treated to the point where you don't have the same symptomatic reactions all the time, like the hypervigilance, panic attacks. Those are treatable things, and we do have things to treat them. And that stigma is just part of that misunderstanding. We live in such a cushioned society here in the U.S. It is so prevalent for people to never leave and never get around. So we end up in this kind of little bubble here.
Right. So one of the things I've noticed is there's a lot of veterans that live in tent cities and live on the street, which is, to me, is horrible. I know that homelessness is the unhoused. Excuse me. I'm used to saying homeless, but I've been corrected in that. In that the new terminology is the unhoused. However you want to wrap the pig, it's still a pig, right? So anyway, there's a lot of veterans living on the street, and I think that's a sad thing. You've got people that have, go to foreign wars, go to foreign countries and fight foreign wars for America, and come back and. I can only imagine that maybe mental health issues is part of that multifaceted problem. They can't cope with stress. They can't cope with the stressors of coming back and being reintegrated into civilian life after being in the military and after being exposed to trauma, right? Stress. So it's like you said, some people start medicating, alcohol, drugs, whatever, to make the pain go away. And we both know that that's not the solution. It's like you said, you're just treating symptoms and you're never going to get to the underlying cause. So I don't know. I would like to somehow see, the problem of being unhoused be addressed a little more aggressively, especially for the veterans. There are people that are unhoused, homeless, whatever, that, they get involved in drugs and alcohol or addictions of some sort, or bad, decisions and choices that cause them to lose their jobs, their houses, their homes, their cars, whatever. And then all of a sudden, and some families try to reach out to them and help them. And then for whatever reason, families get tired of them and go, we're done trying to help you, and say, go your way. And then they wind up in Tent City behind Walmart or Target or, under a bridge somewhere. And I get that. But I don't know. I kind of have a heart for those people and would like to see more aggressive solutions to, for God's sake, this is America, right? Why do we have people living on the streets? We're one of the richest nations in the world, and we've got veterans living in tents or living under a bridge, or maybe it's just me, but to me it's sad.
Yeah, well, first of all, we have to take a more strategic view of how we're tackling these problems. Right. Just like you said, if someone's dealing with traumatic brain injury or PTSD, you're in a situation where you're not going to be able to assimilate. So first of all, we need to bring these people in and treat the underlying cause of what's going on. Now, if there's a layer of drug addiction on top of that, this job gets harder because, even as effective as the therapies that we use, if someone has an active substance abuse problem, then I'm pushing a boulder up a hill trying to fight the inflammatory cascade in their brain. So first step, get them stabilized, get them sober, implement a housing solution, or implement a solution where they're able to access some of these regenerative health programs and these regenerative health protocols so we can start healing and rewiring the brain. Because until you heal those injuries, they are not going to go away, and their condition is going to continue to worsen. They're not going to be able to hold a job, and we'll end up in a situation where veterans with TBI who have been on the streets are just wards of the state. And that doesn't solve the problem. We need to address it in the brain. And here's a stat that always blows my mind when we get on the conversation of, not only homelessness, but incarceration. Take a stab at the number of estimated violent offenders who have a traumatic brain injury inside the criminal justice system right now. Just hit me with a number.
What, a percentage? Percent?
It's 80%.
Wow, I was close. Price
is right.
Sort of.
You weren't far off. Yeah.
Right.
80%. That's insane. Look at how big this problem is. It's
and how many of those people are probably undiagnosed, right?
Oh, a majority.
Yeah, and so they're like, the say they're in jail or in prison or whatever, they're just labeled as violent criminals, right? You're just violent, you're an animal, you're whatever, and that may be true, but it's like you said, the symptoms have to be treated, but you got to get to the root cause. Right.
Yeah, you do.
So again, another multifaceted problem that there's no simple answer for. And if you got a homeless person if you got a veteran that's homeless, that, like you said, if they had PTSD, have PTSD, but then now they're self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, and they get acclimated to living in a tent city. A lot of people that have been on the streets for 1 or 2, 3 years longer, they get acclimated to it, and now they don't know how to live under. It's like they're in a cage when you stick them in an apartment somewhere, and they're like, oh man, they don't know how to live. They don't know how to get back to that normal state, right? So Sam, I'm going to give you like 5 minutes for an elevator speech to talk to the listening audience and to maybe some of those people out there that do have PTSD or are suffering from it or need help.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I mean, the biggest message that I have, if you are suffering from depression, anxiety, PTSD, or TBI, just know that there's hope. The traditional establishment has told you that this is going to be something that you're going to have to live with and manage for the rest of your life, and that's simply not true. There is growth on the other side of this, especially when we're able to deploy treatments that are designed to treat the root cause. We have a number of those at the organizations that I'm involved with, but they're available pretty much everywhere. You can get access to TMS, access to ketamine, or access to hyperbaric in just about every single major city in the U.S. And it really is on us to break this stigma down so that people understand that you can get better. At Mind Spa, we use a really powerful combination of ketamine, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy, along with culturally competent talk therapy, to help heal and rewire the brain of folks who are suffering from depression, anxiety, PTSD, and TBI. At the end of the day, I just want everybody to know that there is hope. You can get better, and you are not stuck like this.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for everything that you're doing with that, and I hope that this podcast episode reaches somebody that needs to hear that.
Yeah.
And thank you for everything that you're doing and for being on the podcast episode. I appreciate you. To the listening audience, I'll say thank you for the privilege of your time. Our podcast is hosted on Captivate FM, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. You can see the video portion of this podcast episode on rumble.com and my YouTube channel. And you can reach me. You can contact me at Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. And what's the name of your organization there, Sam?
Yeah, Mind Spa. So you can find us at mindspadenver.com. And the best place to find me is LinkedIn. I'm super responsive on there. Sam J. Peterson. I'll come right up. You'll see my headshot.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.